Nobody likes to talk about the word, but we're going to talk about it today. Taxes, a new one on short-term rentals. With me today, Director of Finance, Mark Milne. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Something new from the Department of Revenue. It was passed this past December. And towns are starting to ramp up and understand what this new short-term rental tax is. So we're going to go through a few of the frequently asked questions and maybe ease some people's fears of what they need to do. And hopefully, you know, this revenue will come back to Barnstable in a positive way.
Sure.
So let's start with the first. What is the short-term rental tax?
Sure. So to level the playing field with for hotels, motels, and other lodging establishments, the state passed the tax, a short-term rental tax, which applies to all units of housing that are being used on a short-term rental basis. Though, in essence, it only applies to those being rented out for more than 15 days in a calendar year. So if somebody's using their house and renting it out for 14 days or less in a calendar year, it won't apply to them. However, if you're exceeding that number of days, you're going to have to pay the state excise rooms tax, the local excise rooms tax, and a new Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund excise tax. And that applies across the state. This is general legislation. It's for every community except for the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. Of course, that only applies to communities on Cape Cod and the islands.
Okay. And the towns had some autonomy, I guess you would say, in setting some of these rates?
Yes, the local rooms excise tax can be set anywhere from 0 to 6%. That is done through legislative action at the local level. Barnstable years ago had set their rate at 6%. There are other communities on Cape Cod that are set at 6% as well, but some are at 4%. So it's a range of 4 to 6% on Cape Cod.
Okay. And when we look at some of these rates, you know, there's these multiple taxes. These are all aggregate, so it gets paid all at once. You're not paying these, you know, piecemeal. That's one tax together.
Right. Yeah. For within the town of Barnstable, anyways, it's going to be when you add it all up, it's 14.45%. Okay. All three, the state, local, and the Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund, all totals 14.45%, and that's all going to have to be collected from the individuals renting the unit and the owners or operators or their agents, if they use an agent to manage that rental property for them, will be responsible for collecting that from the renter and submitting it on a monthly basis to the Department of Revenue. It doesn't come to the town, it goes to the Department of Revenue. Just like the hotels and motels now collect their the state and local excise tax, and they send that to the Department of Revenue.
Right. So we'll back up just a little bit, and you know, we were talking before the show. We don't really have any idea of how many of these rentals are out there because there's no data on that at this point in time. So how is the Department of Revenue going to track this? Is there some type of registry or a registration process?
Yes, Department of Revenue is in the process of establishing a registry. They anticipate having it up and running in March, so very soon. And they'll be letting us know more information about the registry. Every homeowner who conducts this type of activity in their home, whether it's they meet that 14-day threshold or not, will have to register. Okay. So more information is coming from the Department of Revenue. We will share that with the community once it's up and running. They do have a frequently asked questions area on their website for homeowners that they can go to and reference and keep an eye on how things are progressing at the state level.
Right. And, you know, again, we don't like to talk about taxes, but, you know, it takes money to make a town run. There's lots of community services out there that have to be funded. From your perspective as a finance director, you know, how do these new types of taxes, because they're different than what we've had, it's an amendment to a regular lodging tax, how will this maybe help the town manage certain services as we go forward?
Well, you know, already, as you probably know, we We put a third of our local rooms excise tax that we collect into a special revenue fund that's used for comprehensive water management in private ways. And we established that fund specifically to help us address our comprehensive water management plan that's subject to the 208 plan under the Environmental Protection Act. And so this allows us to dedicate more resources now for that particular purpose to address that plan. In addition to what we're doing with that special revenue fund, this new 2.75% Cape Cod and Islands Water Protection Fund will provide an additional revenue source as well, again, to help address that plan, which is probably the largest capital program we're ever going to see. So it's a real useful tool for us to specifically address this large capital plan.
Right, and it actually shares the load a little bit from resident as well as our visitors, is that the visitors will pay some towards this infrastructure that they're using.
Yes, yes, it's a it's going to take resources from multiple levels. We're trying to obtain federal funds to address the issue, state funds, and the local contribution will be provided from residents as well as visitors now through the use of these taxes. Right.
So with the new, you said March, how are people going to kind of get notified by stuff like this? Either registration, or is there going to be communication from the town back out to some of these once you know who they are?
Yes, well, it's going to be, individuals also have to be responsible for making sure that they're complying with all regulations if they're conducting this type of activity. It's not necessarily the town's responsibility, but we're going to do whatever we can to communicate this out to the community through programs like this, our website. However, we don't know who these people are, so we can't directly contact them. So there is some responsibility on the homeowners as well. But many of the people who conduct this type of activity on their property work with a realtor. And the Cape and Islands Realtors Association is well aware of this new legislation. They have very helpful information for owners of properties who conduct this type of activity on their website. They can contact the Cape and Islands Association of Realtors for more information on that as well. So there's a number of ways the information is getting out to the community, whether it's that organization or the Town of Barnstable or the Department of Revenue.
Right. And you said something earlier, too, that the Town Council has just passed, funded a study for this particular issue as well.
Well, they provided some money for a consultant to come in and help us look at our zoning and any regulations that we may want to adopt to regulate short-term rentals in the town of Barnstable. As this is new, so we're going to have to take a look at that. We have this type of activity taking place in a lot of different currently residentially zoned areas in town, and whether or not we want to continue to allow that type of activity to happen in those areas. We need to be thoughtful about that process and reach out to stakeholders and engage them, and that's what this money is going to be used for, is to go out and do some community engagement, to talk about, to look at our zoning and to look at regulations perhaps that we can implement to help regulate this type and enforce this type of activity.
Right. And any last kind of comments that you want to make to the folks out there that do have these short-term rentals? I know that the town's website does have a frequently asked questions document up there now, so they can get that information. But anything else that you want them to be aware of that we can get the word out to them?
Yeah, well, just pay attention to the town's website, the Department of Revenue's website. Go to speak to the Cape and Islands Association for Realtors if you have any questions. People using online platforms. I don't know how that is going to, how the tax is going to be collected, if at all, through the online platform. They may not. The online platform service provider may not provide that type of service. It may be the homeowner's responsibility. So just educate yourself. Feel free to call. My contact information is on the website under the frequently asked questions, as well as the Cape and Islands Association of Realtors. So just stay tuned. There's going to be a lot more information coming forward, and we're going to be sharing that with the community as we receive guidance from the Department of Revenue, which is still evolving.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Mark. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.